Noel and Sam met Saturday afternoon to design their movie set. Noel would rather have been playing volleyball with his fraternity brothers, but in spite of his nonchalant posturing, film class mattered to him. Plus, he was stoked about their movie. When Noel arrived in the shooting studio, Sam immediately showed him a picture of the Blackbird suit. Noel was glad Sam wasn't looking at him when Noel first saw the picture. He was pretty sure he went pale. It felt like he'd gone pale. He'd suddenly gotten cold and weak and shaky. What the heck was happening? When Sam turned to ask Noel what he thought, Noel bent over and pretended to tie a shoe. "It's rad. Above and beyond, dude." "Yeah, thanks. I kind of freaked myself out when I looked in the mirror," Sam said. Noel rose, pretty sure his normal coloring was back. Leave it to Sam to admit that he was freaked out. Sam had no clue how to be cool. He was too honest, too open, and too himself to get within sniffing distance of cool. "Okay, we're thinking bedroom, right?" Sam stood in the middle of the set. "Nightmares, night terrors, cold sweats, paranoid self-defense, panic phone calls. Yep, I think it's the ultimate in a film for a one-room set." Noel pretended to speak into a microphone. "Step right up, folks. Get all your creep factor right here. One-stop shopping." Sam laughed. Noel grinned. Sam wasn't bad-looking when he laughed, Noel thought. Sam's problem was that he always looked so serious, with strong features, a wide mouth, and a sharp jawline. Sam usually came across as harsh and angry even when he wasn't. His face was like one of those carvings on totem poles. In fact, when Noel had met Sam at the beginning of the semester, the previous year, he'd asked Sam if he was a totem pole. The dude was so tall, and he wore a lot of black, red, and tan. "Do I have something on my face?" Sam asked. "Just your ugly mug." Noel gave Sam a playful punch to let Sam know he was kidding. "Come on, man." Sam tossed Noel a screwdriver. "Let's get to work." Over the next 2 hours, they built furniture, hung pictures, made the bed, and argued about which personal and decor items went where and why. Sam seemed to have a particularly entrenched opinion about dirty socks. "This movie is about airing your dirty laundry and what happens to you when you do. The dirty socks should leave a prominent place in the visual narrative, not just be tossed off to the side," Sam said. Noel held up his hands. "I give." Another half hour, Noel was getting bored. "So, Sam, what dark secrets could the Blackbird get out of you?" Sam dropped the stack of magazines he was carrying. Noel laughed. "Guilt much?" Sam shook his head. "Coincidence." "Uh-huh." Noel looked at Sam. "Well, I don't have any dark secrets," Sam said. The way he was industriously cleaning up the magazines made Noel think that Sam was hiding something. "Come on, dude, spill," Noel laughed. "The secrets, not the magazines." Sam finished restacking the magazines, and he straightened. He looked down at Noel. "Nothing to spill. What about you?" Sam is really a nerd, Noel thought. He wasn't the kind of guy Noel usually hung out with, but Sam was a genius in film class. "Always hitch your wagon to the best horse," Noel's grandfather used to say. Noel's grandfather was a multimillionaire. Noel figured his grandfather's advice was pretty wise. "Okay," Noel conceded. "I'll tell you mine." He threw himself on the bed and put his hands behind his head. "Hey," Sam said. "Shoes, I borrowed that bedspread." "Fine, Mom." Noel kicked off his shoes. Sam ignored him and started hanging curtains over a fake window. "So, I'm not proud of this," Noel said. But was that true? Might it be possible, if he was really telling the truth about his dark secret, that he was a little proud of it? "If it's a dark secret, I don't know why you would be proud of it," Sam said. "Okay, whatever. So, when I was in junior high, I would have been maybe 12 or so, I guess. I was a bully." Sam turned around and gave Noel a long look. "What do you mean?" Sam asked. "You know, a bully." Noel chuckled. "A pretty ruthless bully, actually." "Give me an example," Sam said. What was wrong with Sam's voice? It sounded stiff. Noel looked up at the ceiling and thought back. "Well, you know, the usual. Basically, I called him as I saw him." Sam leaned against the wall and stared at Noel. "I still don't get it." Noel sat up in bed. "Okay, so there was this really awkward fat girl." She had all these weirdo habits, like she wouldn't look you in the eye, and she was always squeezing her hands together. And she had trouble talking. She didn't stutter, but she seemed to have trouble figuring out how to talk. She was just weird. She had funny facial expressions and wore the stupidest clothes I've ever seen. I mean, it looked like she did all her shopping at thrift stores, not the cool ones. Her clothes never matched and stuff, so I started calling her second hand, SH for short. And when she'd walk down the hall, I'd go, shh. It caught on. Everyone was doing it. Noel laughed. That was a riot, stuff like that. Oh, and then one time she came to school wearing these high-water pants. I mean, she looked so stupid. So my friends and I threw water in her face. Get it? High water? Noel laughed. And she wore these thick glasses and always looked like she was squinting to find her way. So I put a dead mole in her locker and asked her if she was grieving her best friend. Noel guffawed. Sometimes he just cracked himself up. He looked at Sam. Sam wasn't laughing. Sam pulled out the chair they'd placed in front of the desk in Floyd's room. You really think that stuff is funny? Sam asked. Well, yeah, don't you? You have to admit it's clever stuff, right? Like there was this time I got like a bucket of burrs. That took me a while to do too. It's not easy gathering burrs. But see, the girl's name was Christine Wilbur. I remember her name because of the burr thing. And she had this long stringy hair she never washed enough. So I figured I'd do burrs for Christine Wilbur. Get it? Burrs for Wilbur. It was actually an experiment. I wanted to see if burrs would stick to greasy hair. Of course, I had to have a control. So when I threw the burrs, I also threw them at her friend, Valerie. Valerie had frizzy hair that I was pretty sure she washed too much. And sure enough, the burrs stick better on Valerie than they did on Christine. I'll never forget them standing there outside the school like a couple of monkeys picking lice off of each other, trying to get those burrs out of their hair. Now that was funny. Noel laughed. Sam shook his head. That's not funny. Noel raised an eyebrow but didn't stop laughing. Seriously? Just picture it. They're like two little monkeys. He pretended to be a monkey picking lice off the other monkey. Sam frowned, stood up, and started pacing around the fake room. Noel leaned back on the bed again. He pulled out a pillow from under the bedspread and plumped it up. I just made that bed, Sam snapped. Chill, I'll fix it when I get up. Sam kept pacing, then he abruptly stopped. Unless you're blind, you have to have noticed I'm not a normal-looking guy, right? Noel tilted his head. You're tall, but so are a lot of my frat brothers. They're tall and athletic, Sam said. I'm just tall. Okay. So when I was in junior high, I was already way too tall for my age, and my legs look even longer than they do now because I was so skinny. So guess what happened to me? Noel figured Sam was bullied, but he decided to wait and let Sam tell his story. Noel knew he could be an idiot, but he wasn't stupid. I was bullied basically from the time I entered first grade until I got into my freshman year of high school. Then that year it stopped. But I can tell you that those jokes you think are so funny, they're not funny to the people on the receiving end of them. Sam crossed his arms and glared at Noel. Noel laughed. Dude, you so look like a totem pole right now. Or no, you look like one of those wooden Indian statues. Noel sat up, crossed his arms, and intoned, How? Noel fell back on the bed and laughed. Sam shook his head and turned around. And that's offensive. Let's just get this done, huh? Noel got off the bed, still grinning. He remade the bed. Maybe not as neatly as Sam had done it, but it was made. And who said Floyd was compulsive about his bed anyway? Are you okay, dude? Noel asked. Sam was keeping his back to Noel. I'm good. Sam turned around and surveyed his room, not looking at Noel. I think we're done here. How about if we call it good for now, and I'll bring my costume from home tomorrow so we could start filming. You don't want to run through the lines now? You're the one who has the lines. I thought you said you already knew them. I do. Well, then I'd say we're done. Sam stepped over the bed and fixed Noel's messy bed-making job. Okay, Kimosabi. Noel chuckled. Sam flicked Noel a look, said, see you tomorrow, and strode out of the shooting studio. I might have gotten on one of the dude's big old nerves, Noel said to himself. Then he chuckled again. He did crack himself up. Returning from his date that evening with Amber, Noel sauntered down the hall to his single room in the frat house, bopping his head in time to the music that vibrated the walls. The speakers were on the first floor, and this was the third, but his frat brothers were partying hard tonight. The whole house shook. It also smelled like beer, knockwurst, and unwashed laundry. He wrinkled his nose. Noel didn't mind the noise, but he didn't love the smell. Noel wouldn't have admitted it to anyone, but he wasn't really fraternity material. He'd pledged this frat because his dad and granddad had been members, and it had been assumed he'd be one too. But it was a cool frat, and Noel was all about doing what it took to be cool, so he was content, especially since he'd won the room lottery at the beginning of the year, which got him the best single room in the 3-story Tudor mansion that housed the frat. The door Noel was scrolling past flew open, and a muscular, rumpled guy with spiky black hair scratched his bare belly and squinted up at the bright hall lights. "What time is it?" he asked. "Almost midnight," Noel said. "You okay, Ian?" Ian was a football player, a dedicated one. He was always talking about treating his body as a temple and stuff like that. He liked to walk around in his boxer shorts, showing everyone just what an awesome temple it was. Noel thought Ian was a little full of himself, but he did find the guy's boxer shorts amusing. He had dozens of them, all in different colors and patterns. Tonight's boxer shorts were white, but they were covered in bright yellow rubber ducks. Maybe it was the rubber ducks that made Noel notice Ian's gray clay-like complexion and the dark smudges under his eyes. You don't expect someone wearing rubber ducks to look like they're terminally ill. Not sleeping lately, and now this. Ian waved a hand at the throbbing beat that still massaged the walls of the building. "The music keeps you awake?" "Yeah. Doesn't it keep you awake?" "Nah, nothing keeps me awake." "Seriously?" "Seriously. I can't sleep through pretty much anything." "I'm envious. I have trouble sleeping every night." "Must have a guilty conscience," Noel said. Ian's eyes widened. "What?" "Chill, I'm just kidding." Noel laughed and punched Ian on the cement he called an upper arm. Ian gave Noel a weak smile and stumbled across the hall to the bathroom. Noel rubbed his knuckles and headed down the hall to his room. Noel arrived back at the shooting studio at noon the next day, even though he spent his Sundays watching sports on TV or playing intramural ball with his frat brothers. He figured he could get to the studio on time to mend things with Sam. Even though Sam hadn't said much, he was clearly pretty upset the day before. Noel might have pushed a little too far. He knew sometimes he did that. When Noel discovered Sam wasn't in the studio yet, he stretched out on the bed to wait. 45 minutes later, he was still lying there. He closed his eyes and must have fallen asleep, because when Amber charged in the room, he was so startled he almost fell out of the bed. "Did you hear?" "Huh?" He sat up. "Hear what?" He rubbed his face. "What time is it?" "It's 2:30. The news about Sam." "What news about Sam?" Amber hugged herself. "They think he might have been hit by a train." She brushed her puffy eyes. "What?" "Apparently he made a costume for your movie, one with black feathers, and they found feathers all over the tracks for the next 2 miles, all over the place." Noel shot off the bed. "Is he okay?" Amber shook her head. "That's the thing. They don't know he's missing." "I've got to go." Noel charged past Amber and tore out of the film studies building. The railroad tracks ran along the backside of the campus, behind the cafeteria, rec center, and swimming pool complex. They were about a half-mile from the film studies building. Jogging past kids throwing frisbee in the quad and others studying in the shade of the campus big cedar tree, Noel ignored several readings and concentrated on getting to the tracks. Hit by a train? Missing? Noel couldn't believe it. When Noel reached the tracks, his stomach clenched at the sight of a half-dozen cop cars pulled up alongside the tracks and double that number of cops walking the area. Pushing into the relatively docile crowd hanging out behind the crime scene tape guarded by a large, balding cop, Noel approached the cop and said, "I'm Sam's friend. Have you found him yet?" "Who are you?" the cop asked. "Sam's friend," Noel repeated. "Noel Markman?" Noel saw no reason to keep his name a secret. He hadn't done anything wrong. Had he? "You know something about what happened here?" the cop asked. "I only know what a friend told me. That because of the feathers, you think Sam was hit by a train and you can't find him." The cop eyed him. Could the guy have been more cliche? Big gut, shiny head surrounded by a black fringe of hair, dark eyes squinted to try and intimidate Noel. Thick hands resting on his gun belt, the cop could have walked off a TV set. Except this cop smelled like hair gel and cheap cologne. At least TV cops were unscented. Noel eyed the cop right back. "If you don't have something to tell us," the cop said, toying with his nightstick, "get back there with everyone else." Noel didn't move. He leaned to his right. Even from here, he could see black feathers fluttering over the tracks. The cop shifted his stance. And that's when Noel noticed the tall couple standing between one of the police cars and a bright red Chevy Suburban. They were talking with the guy in the baggy suit. Noel bit the inside of his cheek so he wouldn't groan out loud. Those were Sam's parents, Paul and Molly O'Neill. He'd met them when they threw a party to celebrate the previous semester's completed film projects. Really nice people. Both were tall and dark like Sam, although Sam's mom wasn't as tall. She was almost as tall as Noel, though. Hefty, too. If there was something called Mom League in the NFL, she could have played. "Call me Molly," she said when Noel had met her. "Miss O'Neill is my mother-in-law." Noel remembered Molly had a great smile and an even better laugh. Right now, she wasn't laughing. She was crying. Her head pressed against her husband's shoulder. Noel clenched his fist in frustration. How could he help? Molly looked up and spotted Noel. "Noel, is that you?" The cop standing with Sam's parents motioned for the TV cop to let Noel pass. Noel couldn't stop himself from giving the cop a smirk as he went past, but his smirk died a quick death when he saw Molly's pinched white face. She rushed to Noel and threw her arms around him. "You heard? Oh, Noel, he's missing, but they say he probably couldn't have survived." Her voice broke, and she turned back toward Paul. Paul held Molly with one arm and offered his other hand for Noel to shake. Holding Molly close, Paul said, "Because of the way the feathers of his costume are scattered, they think he was probably grazed by the train and then thrown clear, but they haven't found him." Noel frowned and watched the black feather scuttle over the ground near the rails. That's when he noticed blood on the rail, on the opposite side of the tracks. Not a lot of blood, just one smear, but it was a big smear. An officer was taking a picture of it. Blood. Noel thought there had to be blood. He kept telling Sam. Noel lingered by the tracks with Sam's distraught parents the rest of the afternoon. By then, the police had declared Sam missing, presumed dead. Multiple search parties had been sent out. Noel had even been a part of one, but no one found anything. When Noel left the tracks to return to his room, he let Molly and Paul hug him, even though he didn't want to be hugged. Being near them was like standing next to a loudspeaker for emotions. Their grief was amplified by their facial expressions and memories about Sam. The clamorous sense of loss was more than Noel could handle. He couldn't stand being around Molly and the cops anymore. He had to get away.